In the small town of Ndola, the day looked normal at first. The air was heavy and still, with low rumbles of thunder far away. Neighbors hurried to tie down their roofs and shut their windows, whispering about the storm that was coming. But inside our house, my parents weren't worried about the sky. They were too busy fighting over money and what the neighbors might think. The radio kept warning about a tornado, but my father scoffed and my mother rolled her eyes, saying people always exaggerated. I stood quietly in the corner, holding my younger brother's hand so tight my knuckles turned white. I was old enough to feel the fear in the air, not just from the storm but from the sharp words flying across the room. Every time their voices rose, my brother pressed closer to me, his small fingers trembling in mine. The house smelled of dust and sweat, and the walls seemed to shake not from thunder but from anger. I remember looking at the window, watching the sky darken, and feeling a truth settle deep in my chest: whatever storm tore through our town that night, it would never be as violent as the one that already lived inside our home. The thunder outside was loud, but the silence between my parents after each cruel word was louder. I wanted to run, to hide, but all I could do was hold my brother and wait for the storm to break. The sky grew darker until it looked like night had fallen in the middle of the day. The wind howled like 1,000 voices, and the air felt thick, heavy, and hard to breathe. Then the tornado came. It roared louder than a train, tearing through the neighborhood with a fury that no one could stop. Windows exploded, roofs lifted like paper, and screams filled the air as people ran in every direction, desperate for shelter. I grabbed my little brother's hand and pulled him toward our house. Our only thought was to get inside where it was safe. The storm bit at our skin with flying dust and sharp bits of debris, but we kept running until we reached the front door. I banged on it with all my strength, my voice shaking as I begged, "Mama, Papa, please let us in." For 1 second, I thought they would open it. I saw their faces appear in the shadows of the doorway. Relief shot through me, but then my father's voice cut like a knife. He shouted that I was nothing but trouble, that I brought chaos wherever I went. My mother's face was cold as she slammed the door in my face, the sound echoing louder than the storm itself. I kept pounding, tears blinding me, as the wind tore at my clothes and my brother cried against my side. The tornado ripped past us, hurling pieces of wood and metal so close I could feel them whip by. I screamed, begged, and hit the door with my fists until they stung, but it stayed shut. My parents had chosen their pride over our lives, and all I could do was hold my brother tighter as the storm raged around us, swallowing the town whole. Rain poured down so hard it felt like the sky itself had cracked open. My brother and I stumbled through the mud, the wind pushing us like rag dolls, until we found a tree strong enough to cling to. I wrapped one arm around the trunk and the other around him, pressing his small body against mine to shield him from the flying debris. The storm screamed all around us, ripping metal, wood, and branches through the air like weapons. My brother's sobs were drowned by the roar of the wind, but I could feel his chest shake as he cried. My heart pounded so loudly I thought it might burst. Through the sheets of rain, I saw movement at our house. My parents were at the window, standing safe and dry behind the glass. For a second, hope lit inside me. Maybe they would finally open the door. Maybe they would see us shivering in the storm and remember we were their children. But instead, I watched my father pull the curtain shut, and my mother turned her back like we didn't exist. That moment was colder than the rain, sharper than the wind. A deep, icy truth hit me: they cared more about their pride and possessions than they did about us. My brother clutched my shirt and whispered, his voice trembling, "Why don't they love us?" His words cut through me more brutally than the storm ever could. I had no answer, only tears burning my eyes. The tornado roared louder, but the real pain came from knowing our own parents had chosen to let us die. I tightened my arms around him, pressing my cheek against his wet hair, and whispered promises I wasn't sure I could keep, that I would protect him, that I would never leave him, even as the storm tried to tear us away. The wind screamed so loud it felt like the earth itself was crying. I held my brother close, both of us shaking, convinced that any second the storm would lift us into the air and smash us against the ground. Just when I thought we couldn't hold on any longer, I saw a light flicker through the rain. It was Mama Chisomo, our neighbor, fighting her way toward us with her head wrapped in a scarf and her body bent against the wind. She shouted something I couldn't hear, then grabbed us with surprising strength. "Come, children," she cried, pulling us away from the tree. Each step was a battle, the mud sucking at our feet, debris slashing past us, but she never let go of our hands. My parents had slammed the door in my face, but here was this woman, not bound to us by blood, risking her own life to drag us to safety. When we reached her small house, she yanked open the basement door and shoved us inside. The moment it shut, the sound of the storm muffled, but the walls still shook as if giants were stomping above. Mama Chisomo wrapped us in thick blankets that smelled of smoke and soap, her hands gentle, her eyes full of worry. She held my brother as he sobbed and brushed the wet hair from my face, whispering, "You're safe now, my children." My chest ached with gratitude and heartbreak all at once. My parents, who should have protected us, had chosen pride. Yet this woman, who owed us nothing, gave us love fiercer than blood. As the tornado tore through the world above, I sat in that basement with my brother's head in my lap and Mama Chisomo's arm around us, and I understood something I would never forget: family is not the people who share your name, but the people who choose to stand with you when the storm comes. When the storm finally passed, the world outside was almost unrecognizable. The sky was strangely quiet, and the air smelled of broken wood, wet earth, and smoke. Houses that once stood tall were now piles of shattered bricks and twisted metal. Trees were torn from the ground like toys, and the streets were littered with fragments of people's lives, clothes, photographs, dishes, everything scattered and ruined. My brother and I stepped out of Mama Chisomo's basement, holding her hands, our legs still shaking. Where our house once stood, there was nothing but rubble, as if it had never existed. And then I saw them, my parents, walking out from the ruins, dust on their clothes but not a scratch on their bodies. They looked calm, even proud, like survivors of a battle. For one fleeting moment, I wanted to run to them, to hear them say they were sorry, to feel them pull us into their arms. But that moment vanished as soon as they opened their mouths. They began telling the neighbors how they had kept us safe, how they had prayed and protected us through the worst of it. I stood frozen, unable to believe the lies spilling from their lips. Around us, people exchanged glances, whispering. They had seen the truth. They had heard my fists pounding on the door, my screams begging to be let in. They knew my parents had left us outside to die. My chest burned with shame and rage all at once. I wanted to scream, to shout the truth, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I clenched my brother's hand, silently vowing that I would never forgive what they had done. Their lies might fool some, but the memory of that night, the rain, the locked door, my brother's desperate question, would stay with me forever. The storm had destroyed our home, but their betrayal had destroyed something far deeper. A few days after the tornado, when the town was still trying to piece itself back together, my parents called for a family gathering. The air was heavy with smoke from burning piles of debris, but inside the room, people sat close together, whispering about what had happened. My brother and I sat in the corner, our bodies still sore, our hearts still raw. I had hoped, maybe foolishly, that this would be the moment my parents admitted what they did, that they would finally say sorry. But instead, my father cleared his throat and spoke with a sharp voice. He said the storm had been brutal, that resources were limited, and that every family had to make sacrifices to survive. My mother nodded, her lips pressed thin, and added that we should be grateful they were alive at all. I felt heat rise in my chest as the room went quiet. Grateful? For being locked out in the storm, left to die while they watched from behind a curtain. My fists tightened on my lap, nails digging into my skin. As if that wasn't enough, they began to laugh. They mocked me for running to Mama Chisomo's house, sneering that I was too weak to stand on my own. My mother smirked and asked why I was clinging to another woman like she was my real mother. Their words cut deeper than any shard of glass flying through the storm that night. Something inside me shifted, like a thread snapping after being pulled too tight for too long. I looked at their faces, cold, proud, unashamed, and I knew I could no longer hope for the love I had begged for my whole life. I realized it was never coming. In that moment, I stopped being the child who waited for their approval. I became someone else, someone stronger. I decided I would never again beg for the love they refused to give. Leaving Ndola felt like stepping out of a cage. Mama Chisomo was the first person to believe in me, the first person to tell me I deserved better than the cruelty I had been born into. She helped me apply for schools, filled out forms with me, and held my hand through nights when the memories of that storm kept me awake. When I received a scholarship to study in Lusaka, it felt like a door finally opening, a door my parents had always kept locked. With Mama Chisomo's blessing and my brother's quiet hug goodbye, I packed the little I had and boarded the bus. As the wheels rolled over the dusty road, I promised myself I would never look back. In the city, life was not easy, but it was mine. I worked long hours, studied harder than I thought possible, and slowly built a world from scratch. Each paycheck, each exam I passed, each new friend I made felt like proof that I was no longer trapped by the past. My parents tried to reach me. At first it was phone calls, then letters written in stiff words about family duty. I ignored them all. My silence became my answer, louder than any words I could have spoken. For the first time, I felt free. Free from the weight of begging for love. Free from the ache of waiting for an apology that would never come. My heart no longer raced when the phone rang, and my stomach no longer twisted when I thought of them. I learned that silence could be powerful. Silence was my shield, my wall, my loudest cry. No contact was not just a choice, it was my freedom, my peace, and my way of saying, "You cannot hurt me anymore." Years later, life in Lusaka had given me everything my heart once thought was impossible. I had a steady job, my own small apartment, and most importantly, peace. I no longer woke up trembling from nightmares of pounding on a locked door. I no longer carried the weight of wanting parents who never wanted me. My silence had become my healing. But one afternoon, as I sat at my desk, there was a knock at my office door. It was soft, almost shy, but when I looked up and saw who stood there, the air in the room turned cold. My parents. They looked smaller than I remembered, their clothes worn, their faces tired. Time and storms had stripped them of the pride they once carried like armor. My father's voice cracked as he spoke, asking for help, saying they had lost everything in another storm. My mother's eyes searched mine, but all I saw was the memory of that night, the rain soaking my skin, my brother's cries, the sound of the door slamming in my face. I stood, calm and steady, my heart no longer begging for their love. For years, I had imagined what I would say if this moment came, and now the words slipped out as easily as breath. "You chose your storm," I told them, my voice clear. "I chose my peace." Their faces fell, but I felt no guilt. I turned away, leaving them standing in the silence they had once forced on me. They had built their storm. I had built my freedom.